like a treasure hunt.
It is kind of. It's like you feel like you're a detective. But yeah, so it's like, did I go into the right profession? I like doing this better than writing papers. Okay, proper use of data not collected by yourself. I think this is a very important topic because when I first started, people were afraid that I was misusing data, and I finally convinced them that I really wasn't misusing their data, and just through just through the School of Hard Knocks, I learned some things to do and not to do when you're dealing with other people's data. One of the big things is to contact the owners and fully disclose what you're doing from the very beginning. And I mean, everything that you're doing, analysis, storage, who you're going to share it with, any reports, publications. I mean, I've been caught in a situation where I've gone through and done analyses and basically wasted my time because I did show it to the authors and they told me that I was doing it incorrectly and you can't use the data that way. So that's another good reason to get them involved early so you don't waste your time doing that.
Was that data that was publicly available?
No,
Okay.
no. It was with the historic move survey stuff. And I'm going to probably repeat some of these things as they go along, but there was different survey methods for different purposes. Like some were for density estimates and some were for just like ratios, bull to cow ratios. And you can't, use both of those to say estimate density.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I didn't know that, so it's a good thing to contact them. And we're still trying to figure out how to get around that one. But access and sharing, some databases have personal information, like the harvest database can have the names of moose hunters, and you really don't want to be putting that out there. And also with like oral interviews and stuff like that, you might not want certain people to see, who the person being interviewed was, So that's something to discuss with the person. They could also tell you, if it is available and it's just not on the database. That way, when you go through your project and you're like, keep that in the back of your mind and it might become useful and be like, oh, that's right, it is available. I could take a look at that, So also, potential reports and publications. It's just a good idea to let them know what kind of some of the results are going to be from all your analysis and stuff, where you plan to put it. And I have not done this, and therefore I have gotten a few people who they don't want to be authors on my papers because I didn't get them involved early enough in the process. Some people are really passionate about being involved in the whole writing process. Even though most of the data is all theirs, and they've reviewed the paper, several times, they just didn't want to do it because they weren't there from the start and didn't add structure to your manuscript. So it's important to discuss that early. And some people are really stingy about authorship. I think it's better to be more open. What's the harm? So I think if you use other people's data, it's good to have a person from the agency, especially if it's mostly their data, to be on there. It's more valid, gives more validity to what you're actually doing. So that's a good idea. One big thing too is to talk about assumptions, limitations to the data, kind of potential sources of error. Does anyone know the difference between random and systematic error? You probably know. No, anyone?
I can kind of,
That's how I feel about it.
I mean, I can think of some source of error that would be random versus some that would be systematic.
What would be a systematic error?
Well, I had to read a book on remote sensing, and like with the colors of things, say for satellite imagery, it might all be shifted in what direction because there's haze.
Mm-hmm.
because of the time of day or the time of year. And so it wouldn't match up with other things, but all of the errors would be in the same direction.
That's an example of systematic error. Another example would be like, say you have a thermometer that's constantly, 2 degrees warm when it takes the temperatures.
Good words.
It's a big systematic error. But it basically continuously biases, your data somehow.
Versus a random would be like a volcano going off, and it's just sort of a one random thing that would skew data for a couple days.
Well, like typos could be random, just like data entry errors. You just pick the wrong digit.
Yeah.
Unless there's a sticky key and it's always the same number, then it releases again.
So,
Or somebody's dyslexic.
Yeah.
so is it like random errors are like easy to deal with, but systematic errors are difficult to detect, and so can bias your results?
Well, I think systematic errors are easier to deal with if you know they're there. That's why it's important to contact the person, who actually collected the data, because they might know that. So if you don't know they're there, it could be, you might never know. Whereas random errors, sometimes you can usually spot those out, but then it's like, you don't really know if it's, an outlier. Random errors, I think, are more difficult to deal with, unless the person knows what's going on. Like with the household surveys, there was like a dramatic change in the number of moose that were harvested, by a community, and it's like, what the heck is going on here? Well, I contacted the person in charge of the project, and basically their person that went around and interviewed kind of stopped interviewing 1 year, and so it was basically, you can't really use that year because the survey person crapped out, and it's not a whole sample. So, that gets into looking at, like when you're looking at survey data, and say you have households, what percent of the community did they harvest? Did they sample? I made that statement before. If they only sampled 10% versus 90%, that's definitely something to consider. So, another thing that I thought of is like, if you discuss like the results with the people who are familiar with the database, they can really provide valuable insight. Like, I forget what year it was. It might have been like 2002, but there was a dramatic increase by like communities harvesting moose, and I'm like, what can make that year special? That it seemed like everyone got more moose. And I was talking with a person at Fish and Game, and I guess that year there were poor salmon runs. And people needed to get their food, they needed to get their protein, so then the following fall there was a big push to harvest moose. I wouldn't have known that just by sitting there looking at the data. So it's just an example of another good reason to talk to people, and early on, because then it can influence how you look at the rest of the years and what you're thinking. Also, it's usually not a good idea for a person to find out that their data has been published without them knowing. And that's kind of the worst case scenario. They read a paper in JWM and, hey, wow, they used my data and never contacted me. So that's a good idea. And in presentations too, I've got in trouble with that. It's not putting like a fishing game symbol, or stuff like that. Just you got to be really straightforward and honest with people where the data comes from. So, but I was in trouble. Just a few ruffled feathers. I didn't get thrown in the tank or anything like that. But I more felt bad, because I try to do right.
You haven't been run out of town yet.
No, not yet. It's getting there.
So, with that, say I got data from Fish and Wildlife or Fish and Game or something, and then I've been working on it and I was going to go present it at some meeting. Would I contact them before I, presented it anywhere, or would I just, if they knew I was already working with it, or would I just make sure to acknowledge them in my presentation?